Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
The chat is open for you to place a couple of words as to how you're feeling at this point after the election. I invite you to put a couple words into the chat. Acceptance, concerned, sad, resigned, wait and see. More coming in, worried, disappointed, hanging on, a little better than before, cautiously open-minded, raw and a little overwhelmed, frightened, distrust for media, concerned and hopeful, curious, relieved. Okay, well, here we go. So welcome to Managing Emotions and Relationships After the Election. Election results can stir up a lot of strong emotions: grief, joy, fear, confusion, or all of the above. You may also find it hard to understand or stay connected with people who voted differently from you. Whatever you're feeling, you're in the right place here today. We're delighted to have Braver Angels co-founder and family therapist, Dr. Bill Doherty, here with us. Since Braver Angels was founded in 2016, Bill has been a steady voice of wisdom, helping us build bridges across the partisan divide. Today, he'll share practical strategies for managing our emotions and engaging with others with grace and compassion. Let's all come together in service to healing and finding common ground in divided times. There will be time for questions towards the end. And yes, the event will be recorded today, so there's no need to jot down every word of Bill's wisdom. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Bill Doherty.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm happy to be with you today. I'm using this kind of cool PowerPoint thing where I appear right on the slide. It's the only technologically savvy thing I know how to do. So you're seeing me at my absolute peak of technology here. Um, so managing emotions and relationships after the election. And we would be, I think, dealing with these emotions and relationships, no matter who won, but they tend to differ based on red or blue, or sometimes reds who voted for Trump or did not vote for Trump, and for blues who are watchful waiting, and blues who are very upset, and everything all in between. So I'm going to begin with the emotional part, and then the relational part as it connects to emotions. And we're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end. This is not going to be one of those things, we've all attended presentations where the presenter promises lots of question time at the end, and then they don't. They run out of time. So just there will be time for questions. I do suggest kind of formulating your questions towards the end, so that you are, because I may be covering some things that you would have asked questions about if you formulate it at the beginning, but looking forward to hearing from you. Okay, so managing strong emotions after the election. The first is to accept your feelings, be they positive, negative, mixed, or numb. This is sort of, I'm also a therapist here as well as a Brave Angels person. So this is sort of psychotherapy 101. Don't try to talk yourself, don't try to deny how you're feeling, and have an idea of what the appropriate feeling is. It's just how you're feeling. But then also question the assumptions and beliefs that are connected to very strong feelings. So this is kind of cognitive behavioral therapy 101. I feel like nobody loves me in this world. And that's the strong feeling. I feel alone, worthless, unlovable. And then, the questioning, the therapist helps somebody say, well, okay, nobody loves you. How about your mama? Could we start to question assumptions and beliefs that are very, very strong? And so with beliefs, with strong feelings related to the election, I find it helpful to, if you're having global fears, is to ask yourself specifically, what do you think will happen? What scenarios are you most concerned about that could happen, and what might counter those? So before this election, there were people on both sides who were saying that if the other side won the election, this would be, or could likely be, the last time we would ever have a presidential election. And I did hear this from some prominent people on both sides. And I think they do it partly to raise the existential level. We heard this term existential all the time. In fact, the last 4 or 5 elections have always been the most important election of our lifetime. I mean, they all are. And so an example of questioning beliefs and assumptions would be that if you're saying to yourself, I don't think Trump will ever leave office, and again, some folks on the right, if Harris had won, may have been feeling kind of hopeless about the country. It's a good idea to say, well, what might counter that? What are the obstacles to a president, this president, and any future president staying in power? And I won't go into all the specifics on that, but if you start to think about your fears, strong fears, in light of what might happen that could lead to a different result. It's not that your fear goes away, and it's not that there's something wrong with the fear or the feeling, but it grounds it more. It grounds it more. So accepting feelings and question and assumptions and beliefs, so that you don't just, give into them, run with them. In addition, recognize that your feelings may change over time. Most of us who have lived at all, in life, know that strong feelings tend to wax and wane, and that how we're feeling at a particular moment is not likely to be exactly how we're feeling down the line. And so they may change. So this is all a matter of getting a perspective on our emotions. Again, not denying them, but getting a perspective on them. And this is the perspective that they are likely to change. Next one is to avoid emotional contagion from people around you. So emotional contagion is often takes this form, that the people who have the strongest emotional reactions tend to carry the day, and then it sort of takes over. I was with a group of in 2016, the day after the presidential election, I was working with a group of African-American high school students, and they had paid attention, I guess, in various ways to the election. But some of them came to school the next day, and these were all, U.S.-born students. Some of them were saying they could be deported from the country, and again, that was the strong fear. And so what the teachers, I was sort of a coach for this process, and there were a couple of Black men who were the teachers, just calmly helped them take a look at our system in this country, our judicial system, our legal system, and help them understand that this was not, in their case, this was not on the table. But without that kind of intervention, if you will, emotional contagion can take off, and then you get lots of folks who are freaking out. The last two ones here are to avoid, I suggest, avoid most social media. Social media, as we know, is based on on outrage, on negativity, on often misinformation or partly true, partly false information. And so I suggest limiting that, as well as other media that kind of inflames you. And also conflict entrepreneurs who are podcasters and others in various TV and other media, who make their living off generating outrage and fear. And so if you're feeling vulnerable, this would be a good time to back off from those media and those individuals on media who are going to inflame your emotions. And then the last one is to give yourself some time and don't do something hard to reverse. This is, sort of a standard practice, a wise practice when you've gotten bad news, to not make any life-changing decisions at that moment. And so hard to reverse. I met a couple once who were so convinced in 2016 that if Trump were elected, that the economy would collapse, and that this was a couple probably 60 years old, and they had built up a 401k, stock heavy. They sold all their stocks the day after the election, cashed it in. Well, the stock market went to record high levels subsequently, and they were holding on, waiting for the crash, which did not occur. And that was not reversible at that point. In fact, one of them had to work more years in order to build back a comfortable retirement. Now, that's an example of, whoa, slow down, and don't do something that's hard to reverse. Another thing that's been happening this time is people making decisions about who they're going to do Thanksgiving with, for people who do Christmas holidays, uninviting people or basically boycotting a family event. I was talking to somebody recently. I gave a talk recently, and somebody told me that he decided, this was actually, he said this was a couple of years ago, that the politics was so tough and he was different from the rest of his family, and he said he wasn't going to go to the family Christmas that his sister always sponsored, and he told me with emotion that his sister never forgot that, and she died 2 years later. She died recently. He had just been to her funeral, and he really regretted that step. After another talk recently, a couple came up, and this is a couple from rural Minnesota, and said that their adult daughters who live in the Twin Cities, where I live, had told them that because the father voted for Trump, they were not invited to come to family Christmas. And the reason I'm putting this here under hard to reverse is that when you boycott a major family event where it's usually all hands on deck, and that might be holidays, it might be a particular religious event, it might be a wedding, a funeral. People do not forget that. People do not forget that. And so I really, this be an example of managing emotions here, not making decisions that could have negative repercussions for years ahead. And unfortunately, people are doing that these days. And What we're going to pivot to now is the relational aspects of this, because I think people are making some of these decisions based on how they are managing themselves emotionally in relationships with people who are different. So that's sort of this is the intrapersonal, the emotional aspects of this and how we manage them now. So the rest of it is going to focus on the feelings that relate to other people in our lives, because I think that's a lot of where the negativity comes. So two ways to make the same point here on this slide. Separate your negative feelings about political leaders and the people in your life. I think that part of what's happening is that there's such strong negative reactions to political leaders that and we can't get to that. What we can get to, if you will, is somebody in our life who voted for that person or supports that person. And so it's a kind of displacement of our public outrage or our disdain onto private individuals. Again, we can't get to them, can't get to Trump or Harris or whoever is your most despised politician. And so it's we turn them into mini versions. And with Trump having won now, and Harris recedes, probably into the background for some time. What I'm seeing is people who oppose Trump and who are very distressed about Trump, taking it out on the people in their lives as if they were his chief advisors, as if they were his chief sponsors or something. So separating out your mother, father, your sister, your brother, your old best friend from school, your coworker. They are not the person who you dislike politically. And this is now a particularly important part of what I want to say, is avoiding expecting others in your life to think and feel like you. So the point here, the question is, can I emotionally self-regulate, knowing that someone important to me sees politics differently? We talk about this in the Families and Politics workshop, and that is that particularly with loved ones, it's natural to want them to see important things like you do, religion and politics being among those. And the issue is, if I am not able to self-regulate, and what I mean by that is to keep my emotional equilibrium, to stay calm, to be able to employ my rational thinking as well as identify my emotions. That's what self-regulation is. If I can't self-regulate, just knowing that somebody important sees politics differently, what I'm saying is that's my problem then. That's my problem. It's not theirs. It's not an interpersonal matter. It's a psychological matter for me. Now, if they're trying to change you, then that's different, okay? You can protect your boundaries without trying to persuade them. So I'm making a distinction between what happens emotionally in us when somebody close to us has very different political views, and that we think their views are and will cause harm in the world. So not just, do you think the Fed should reduce the interest rates more? But, real people are affected. Can I emotionally keep my equilibrium with that difference? If they are, of course, to repeat the point here, behavior towards me, if somebody is, we talk about the family gladiator in the Families and Politics workshop, if somebody is setting out to persuade me to put me down, that's a different matter. Okay. And then I can decline, I can, defend myself appropriately, and use bravery angel skills for doing that. But what I'm saying is that would be the same thing if they were trying to come at me on my religious beliefs or anything, any other value, anything that's important. If there's somebody in my life who is hypercritical of me for, in an unfair way, well, I'm not going to keep engaging with them about that issue if they're invading my boundaries, and I will appropriately defend myself. But can you see that's the issue of the politics is secondary there. It's how they're treating me, which is different from their statement of their view. If it's the statement of their view and I take it personally and get agitated, well, then I'm suggesting that means I have some personal work to do. That's a self-regulation matter. And so the next one is if you're in a group where people are sharing views you detest, so you're the only red in the blue environment, or you're the only blue in the red, environment, say with family. This is going to be a challenge for your emotional self-regulation. And what I suggest is to give yourself permission to distance, to tune out. Nowadays you can always get on your iPhone or step away without losing your emotional equilibrium. So letting go of internally, how could they think that way? What is wrong with all these people? So what I'm doing is sort of acting out the emotional dysregulation, the agitation that I'm with a group of people I care about who see these things very differently than I do, and they're talking among themselves, and I'm present. Maybe they're talking in a way that like any reasonable person would agree with them, and I don't agree with them. And what I'm saying is that that's not comfortable, but it does not have to lead to emotional agitation and distress, and disruption in oneself, because they're just doing their thing. Now, if they all turn to me and put me down, that's a different matter. And we talk about skills in our workshops for difficult moments, but the mere presence of the great majority of people who are loved ones talking among themselves about something that I completely disagree with, I'm suggesting it's possible to not let oneself get agitated about that, and to take steps to not engage. And if you want to think about much milder examples, everybody is a complete sports fanatic, and you hate sports and you hate listening to it. Well, okay, you find a way to go trim the turkey or something like that, rather than participate in a conversation that you feel completely on the outside of. I want to add at this moment that our braver angel skills, the ones that we've been teaching, are primarily for one-to-one conversations and relationships. I'm going to be giving a presentation the week before Christmas on how to manage oneself in group settings, family, coworkers, friendship groups, where you're the outlier. We do have a workshop called Being Red in Blue Environment and Being Blue in a Red Environment, but we've not really emphasized how to manage oneself in a group. And so we're going to be talking about that, because many of us are going to be around family groups at the holidays, and some of us are going to be in the distinct minority. So how to manage it. And so what I'm offering here is to give yourself permission to tune out or to step away. But I'm emphasizing to do it with an inner calm, at least not in agitation, because they're just doing their thing. And what I'm emphasizing here is that it's only worth getting upset in terms of getting agitated. When I say worth, it's psychologically appropriate if somebody is in my face for this to be troublesome, and then I have to have some skills to manage that, as opposed to they are doing their thing. They are being who they are, not at me, then what I'm suggesting is the best way to maintain one's emotional balance is to accept that, to accept that. And then last point here is with people on your own side. It's a similar thing, accepting emotional differences and differences in coping styles. So what can happen with both reds and blues, you get two reds who differ dramatically on Trump, although they might both be glad that the Republicans won the presidential election and took over the Congress, but they may feel very differently about Trump, and so there's a big difference there that I'm suggesting that people accept their difference and not fight about how they're feeling about him. They can have a rational disagreement. And then with blues, and I see this a lot with blues these days, is you have minimizers and maximizers. Okay. And this is true for just personality types and coping styles, that the people who want to, their best coping is to imagine the worst, and to talk about their fear and their agitation, their frustration. And then they may be married to, friends with, family with somebody whose style is to tamp down the sort of strongest feelings and the worst anxieties about the future, and say things like, well, we're just going to have to see how it turns out. And then the person whose coping style and personality is, I want to talk about this. These are normal emotional differences and coping styles. They come all the time. So somebody in your family, dear loved one, has a serious medical diagnosis, and some people are going to want to know everything about it and talk about how they feel about it. And the other person is going to say, well, let's just see how it plays out. Those are both normal, but what they end up doing is fighting each other, communicating to each other something wrong with you because of how you are feeling about and talking about, in this case, political differences. So this is, by the way, a potential hazard for people who really get into Braver Angels, okay? Because when you really get into Braver Angels, you might be saying, well, there's another side, or there's maybe some truth in that criticism, or there may be some good that happens as well as bad. You may be, and you may be reacting to somebody in your life who says, all of those Republicans, all of those Democrats, everybody who voted for Trump is this way. And that's some of how they're dealing with their emotions. And then the other person wants to go, no, slow down, Brave Angels, I think that's sort of a stereotype. So what I've learned is, to summarize this point, is that some of the interpersonal conflict, that unnecessary interpersonal conflict, comes with people who are actually like-minded, who are arguing about who's more right about the terrible wrongs that are going to happen. And the solution to that is to accept the way you cope with worries and accept the other person's way of coping, and don't get into conflict about whether somebody is minimizing something that's going to be terrible or is maximizing something that they think is terrible, but we don't know for sure. So this is, I think, of the polarization is like a virus, okay? And it can spread in lots of different ways. And some of it can spread within people who actually see the political issues quite similar. So it's worth being careful about how we deal with one another, even in agreement. So next two slides are about our understanding of why people voted for the other side. And my view is that most people have complex attitudes towards political leaders, political parties, and policies. But we tend to assign simplistic reasons. Okay, so listen to people talk about, or maybe you feel the same way. Why would people, Blues and I were saying this, why would any reasonable person vote for Trump? And Reds, would do a similar thing with Harris, but also, depending who they most dislike. And why would Democrats stay committed to Biden when he was clearly infirm? And then you start to assign all kinds of, they're ignorant of the facts, they're misled by biased media, they're cult followers, they're selfish. So the classic things, by the way, that Reds say about Blues is they like government handouts, they like big government power. The Reds say Republicans don't care about the needy, they want to keep their money for themselves. But nowadays, cult follower, they're poor, misled people, or they're bad people, selfish people. Now, I'm not saying there's nothing to anything there. In our Red Blue workshop, we have a stereotypes exercise where we ask people to identify the stereotypes that others have of their own side, and we ask them to look at whether there's kernels of truth, okay? But what I'm saying, these are very simple, and most people, not everybody, but most people are complicated. So you have people who, I remember the very first Brave Angels workshop in December 8th to the 10th. So it was probably on the 9th in a fishbowl activity. One of the Reds, I still remember, he was sitting to my left, a young man who, when Trump came up, he said, well, Trump is a scumbag. That were his words. Trump is a scumbag. And then he went on to say why he voted for him. So there's some, Trump wasn't a hero to him, but he thought that Trump was better than Hillary Clinton. I read a recent article that Amber Lapp, who is, those of you who know David Lapp, one of our co-founders, she writes a column for a newsletter I read, and she interviewed a couple of women, working class women in Ohio, who were Reds, young women, about their attitudes towards the abortion referendum that was occurring. That this was a couple years ago in Ohio, and so you want to ask yourself: was this woman pro-life, pro-choice? How's she going to vote for the referendum? Oh my goodness. She personally opposed to abortion. I thought it was taking a human life. So in that sense, she said she's pro-life. But on the other hand, she had some friends who had very awful circumstances in which they had become pregnant. And did she want to tell them and the state tell them that they could not make the choice to have an abortion? So she's dealing with what's the role of government and the morality. And I remember she described, I don't know how she voted, but she went into the ballot box on the referendum still uncertain about how she's going to vote. Okay, but maybe on a survey, I don't know which one she fills in, she's a Red and she's pro-life, but much more complicated. So always look for more complexity in people than the assignment that we have on our side of why they voted the way they do. And so beyond just one-to-one, we can also learn about people on the other side, such that, because sometimes people are not very articulate about exactly all the reasons why they voted the way they did, or they may feel like you're going to criticize them. So I found it helpful to not only listen to individuals, but to read and study and try to find out more of where people are coming from, with the goal of being able to, in a conversation, to explain back to somebody what you understand their rationale being for how they voted, in such a way that they say, yes, you got it. Yes, you got it. We talk in our workshop for elected officials on achieving accurate disagreement. Accurate disagreement means I understand where you're coming from, what your stand is, and how you came to it in such a way that you say, yes, you get it, and that they can do the same for me. So, dedicating oneself in a divided world It's sort of like if we're divided, Northern Ireland, Catholic, Protestant, to try to really understand in some depth how Catholics and Protestants came to view these issues, or Israelis and Palestinians. And this includes understanding apparent contradictions. Because part of what I've learned is that as we listen to other people, um, we assign hypocrisy as an explanation often for their reasons. So a couple of examples is if so people who are Christian conservatives who historically emphasize character as the primary, as a certainly very high up there on the qualities of elected officials, particularly the president. And then they've acknowledged that Trump has some challenges in that area, but nevertheless enthusiastically supporting him. You can view that as hypocrisy, or you can view that as inconsistency. And also, and this is something I've learned is really important, is to look for inconsistencies on your own side. And so blues who criticize Christian conservatives for being, two-faced on the character issue, could benefit from thinking about Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky and how feminists, many prominent feminists, turned on Lewinsky and supported Clinton and did not call out the attention to this abuse of power on Clinton's part. So no side, all sides struggle with inconsistencies. Similar to, I mentioned the age issue with Biden, that a lot of Reds I've heard say that Democrats who supported Biden until the end, until he decided to get out, were two-faced because they were saying that Trump didn't have the right personality for the presidency, and they were supporting somebody who they saw was, in their view, obviously unsuited as a person intellectually. And so you can either view that as you're blindly following your people, or this is troubling inconsistencies is part of human nature, and it's not confined to one side or the other. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is that what I've learned is a block to understanding the other side, and therefore getting really worked up and having trouble in relationships, is looking for the contradictions, looking for the facts that don't add up, as if it's all on one side, and then no longer listening, no longer trying to understand, because we have the gotcha. We have the gotcha contradiction, the gotcha ignoring of a fact. The last point here on this slide is understanding does not mean agreement. It does not mean condoning, and it does not mean compromising your values. And here I think this is part of what the Braver Angels, why Braver Angels is for a lot of people an acquired taste, because we're inviting people to try to deeply understand folks who differ from them profoundly around issues that have consequence. This is not differing on sports, there's big consequence for people. And I think there is something, it may be even in human nature, that if I communicate that I really understand you, even though I differ from you, and I think your views are ultimately dangerous for the country, to understand means that I agree or that I condone it. To understand why people engage in violence for a political cause is not to condone it. But it's also not a matter of simplistically saying they're bad people and they just chose to do bad things. It's more complicated than that. And then the compromising values it's almost like if I try to deeply understand where people are coming from and hold my views separately, there are people who will say, who will think that you're compromising your values. And by the way, where this comes up, I've found, not from people on the other side who generally appreciate trying to be understood. This comes up on one's own side. So some of the biggest, uh, most tense conversations, let me put it this way, that I've had in the last year or so have been with people who basically agree with me about politics and who, when I try to represent in a fair way, in a fair way that I think people on the other side actually would say, yeah, that's right, that's how I see it. I get a rush of anger sometimes, a rush of anger. And then I have to try to use my skills we talk about it in depolarizing within. But what I've noticed at a larger level, not to be critical of my friends here, because I can do the same thing, is that understanding is a benefit. It's a way we can work together in the future. It is not a compromise of my values. It does not mean agreement. Okay, so much of our politics is fear-based, in my view. And one of the main things that we tend to do, that if we can stop doing it, we can do something better here, can help with more relational coping and emotional coping with the election and with in the years ahead. So what I've seen is that people on both sides tend to dismiss the other's fears of their own side as either illusions, like where did that come from, or as point scoring. Here's my list of these are my fears at what you guys are going to do. And now we're going back to Psychotherapy 101. If you don't accept the fears of people who are different from you, if you don't accept their fears as real to them, then you can't explore common ground solutions. So if you want to think about a marital relationship, for example, if you can't accept that your spouse is afraid of something or is deeply troubled by something that you do, if you just argue that rationally it's not grounded, even if you don't think it's grounded, if you can't accept that the starting position is they're afraid of this, you can't go forward. You can't really explore common ground solutions. So my own view, what I see happening is that Trump supporting Reds tend to not take seriously the fears of Blues about Trump following through on some of the very heated rhetoric that he has used in the campaign and in his whole political career. So when I see those conversations, I hear Reds saying, and they may be right, so it's not a question of accuracy, but of saying, well, look at what he does, not what he says. There are safeguards in practice, and don't get so worked up here. Don't take when he says I'm going to be a dictator for a day. That was a throwaway line. Blah blah blah. What I'm saying is that if they don't take these fears seriously, that there are Blues who genuinely are scared to death of what this guy might do, then you can't really have a really good conversation and connection. And similarly, I think Blues have trouble understanding that many Reds have deep fears and concerns about the blue side and the blue perspective. In fact, if I had to say something, I think it's easier for Reds to understand that Trump, who is a kind of out there person, scares people. Although I think, again, Reds could do a better job of accepting that those fears are real. But Blues, in my experience, often see their own side as good and righteous, and maybe some criticism, maybe spend too much money or something like that. But Reds, conservatives, often have deep-seated fears of a kind of hegemony, of a overtaking of our country by liberals, by blues, who have already won control of the media, most of the media, the educational system, popular culture. And then if you have on the blue side an activist approach to government, then and control of the government over lengthy periods of time, so maybe not, in a 4-year period, there is a strong fear among many conservatives that activist federal government in the presence of culture wars, for example, and of a tendency to regulate will eventually lead to a taking away of liberties, of individual liberties. One read recently said that he was afraid that he would lose his job if he came out as a Trump supporter at his work. That was in the private industry, but a fear that eventually that could be the government approach as well, and that the decline of personal liberty from a large, ever increasing government. Now, if you're a blue listening to this, you might say, where is that coming from? I'm inviting you to take it as real. And when we create environments where people can safely talk about their fears, this stuff comes out. So I was leading a red-blue conversation, actually a series of conversations in Minnesota. We have a project called Reduce the Rancor Minnesota. We got the head of the Republican Party in the state and the head of the Democratic Party in the state to co-sponsor this. And one of my favorite projects within this, Reduce the Rancor Minnesota, is a group of students from McAllister College, which is a very liberal college in Minnesota, and the University of Northwestern, not Northwestern University, but it's a Bible college called the University of Northwestern, which is the most conservative school of higher education in the state. And we have a small group of students and the presidents of the universities who are coming together a couple times a month to break bread together, have a meal together, and then to get to know each other in some depth. So we had a whole series of meetings. The fourth one, we got to politics as they got to know each other. And in Fishbowls, we had people identify their political leaning and then say why was it good for the country, and then what their concerns about their own side are, like we do in our Red Blue workshop. And there was a Chinese American student. She was an immigrant from China. And her parents lived through lots of hard times in China. And she said she is conservative partly because she is very worried about the power of central authority, as in the central government, because her parents saw, and when she lived there, she saw the abuses that occur when you have a very strong central government. So that's why she's a conservative. So my point of this slide is not that you necessarily agree that the worst excesses of the other side will come to play, but accepting the fears and not dismissing them, reasoning about it, but not dismissing is so important. So last slides are about some some things we can do. So hopefully a little bit of inspiration here. I've learned that focusing on shared values and hopes for our country and its people is quite comforting. Biggest learning I had in the first year of Braver Angels, basically 2017, particularly when we did a bus tour through 10 states and 13 towns, doing our workshops, Red, Blue, and a skills workshop over and over. I always like to say we were like a B league basketball team going on a bus and going into towns and running our workshops and discussing them and fine-tuning them, but lots of workshops. One of the biggest things I learned was that there's more commonality about our hopes, our highly cherished values, and our policies, and that I had been equating policy differences with fundamental value differences. So healthcare, education, affirmative action, that I had been equating differences at the level of policy. Policies are means to ends. But when you get people in a space where you have them articulate what their values and hopes for, you find a lot more commonality. We had a school district in Minnesota that was one of the early ones getting torn apart over concerns of red parents that their kids were being indoctrinated into left-wing values, and Facebook wars broke out and agitation at the level of elections. And 4 parents, 2 reds, 2 blues, approached us and met with them, and we arranged for some living room conversations. And in those conversations, there were half red, half blue parents. We asked in fishbowls, one of the questions was, what are your hopes for your child in terms of being a citizen of the broader world and having a sense of knowledge and responsibility in the broader world? Some question like that. And should the schools be doing that? At that level, you couldn't tell the difference between the reds and the blues. The reds wanted critical thinking. They wanted kids to be exposed to this big, wide, diverse society we live in and world. The blues also wanted critical. They didn't want anybody to be indoctrinated, and they wanted their kids to be able to be skeptical of, when appropriate, of all kinds of ideas, including liberal ideas. So when you get to the level of what people want, they've done this in schools all the time. What kind of morality do you want our children to have? Much more similarity, much more similarity. So if you focus on that, if you begin a conversation about education or healthcare with an assumption that you're likely to find that very few people wake up in the morning and say, how do I undermine people's access to health? And how do I make sure that children don't learn? You can access those. If you start there, you can discuss policy much more openly. If you assume that the differences on issues that are important to you mean that people on the other side in your life are morally monsters, they occupy a different moral universe, and it's very hard to be in relationship with them. And so, bringing this to a conclusion, then we're going to have plenty of time for questions. Try some humility in your predictions about future events. This is something I've been working on. So maybe I'll be right, partly wrong, or mostly wrong. And maybe there's some advantages of being older, because I can count, I don't have enough fingers, probably enough toes, to count the number of predictions that I confidently made about how things were going to turn out politically and in other ways for this country that were wrong, or partly wrong, or sometimes completely wrong. And so some humility, and this virtue of humility is one of the foundations, by the way, of Braver Angels, and why we don't set out with the assumption that any of us have the correct answers, and our job is to teach others. And as Yogi Berra, that great philosopher, baseball player, once said, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. And if you want a communication skill with this, one could be, this is what I am concerned will happen, or this is how I'm reading the forces that are going to line up. And here's what it is. And whether that will happen in this way, I don't know, but this is what I am worried about. So some humility about predictions about future events, because we know so much can intervene at any time. Luck, bad luck, good luck, and change so much. And then don't focus only on national politics if you want to emotionally cope with where we are now. It's a terrible mess. It's a terrible mess. And it's very hard for those folks to change when we don't change. So a little story, we've done several workshops for members of Congress. If you want to feel a little hope for House representatives, Google the Problem Solvers Caucus. So we did some Red Blue type workshops for Problem Solvers Caucus. And I remember one member of Congress who said that he was on a Zoom call with constituents. Actually, these were people in his own party. And one woman said to him, I love your politics. I love your policies. I'm really with you. I wish you were more angry. Okay. So there's a lot that we're feeding, and then a lot of self-interest in national politicians. But there are stories of hope at the state and local levels. So I gave you an example from the community dealing with the school board issues, which they got past. They got past those issues at this town. In part, it wasn't just our work, but in part because of other things as well. There are stories of hope. There are lots of local officials attending our workshops in states like North Carolina and Minnesota, where we have those connections. We're doing more in Brave Angels to encourage local civic action by Reds and Blues. Taking a local issue, this is one of the examples is California, where the homeless encampments is such an issue. Well, they're not good for anybody. And so Reds and Blues coming together, having some town hall meetings to try to find some common solutions. There's much more flexibility for what political leaders can do and what local people can do at the state and local levels. And when we overfocus on the national, it leads to despair, and it assigns too much responsibility for change at that level, which seems to be so blocked. And so finally, and then we're going to move to questions. I encourage you to decide if you want to be a bridge builder, despite your worries, fears, or burnout. And for me, the bridge building brigade seems already well staffed, but the firefighting and bricklaying brigades, not so much. And for me, this is just, I'm going to give you my own view as I finish up here. I believe in the capacity of we the people to find a way to fix our institutions and learn to flourish together in a complex world. I'm going to say it again. I believe in the capacity of we the people to find a way to fix our institutions and learn to flourish together in a complex world. It's up to us. So I appreciate your hanging in there with me. And now I'm going to go off my screen, and Mary Jo is going to lead us in a Q&A session.
All right, I'm going to start with Paula, and after Paula, it will be Phil. Paula, go ahead.
So you have to unmute Paula, and then we're ready to go.
Am I unmuted?
You're good. I can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation, Bill. I mean, you touched on some things that really gave me a lot to think about. My question remains, and it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. What do you do when you're in a conversation with someone and you disagree, but you can't even agree on what's real or true?
Yeah.
That, I'll give a wild example, and I haven't run into this, but I've run into others. A wild example would be a Holocaust denier. And here we are, we're supposed to come to some agreement on how you feel, how I feel, how we see things. And there's, how do you deny? And it's dangerous.
Have you run into that one, Paula?
Not personally.
Right.
That's why I used it as an extreme example.
Sure.
But I've run into others where all the evidence points to something, which is all we have for reality.
If you could give me an example of one you've run into, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Not to put you on the spot.
The 2020 election was stolen.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So I always prefer an example that somebody's experienced rather than
that makes sense.
The farthest out ones, the flat Earth or something like that. It's just sort of okay. So thank you for that, because that's a core issue. of when we don't agree on certain kinds of important facts. How do we go forward and create policy, right? And find common ground. And my response is that, unfortunately, we live in an era where we don't we have different sources of factual information, and it comes down to who we trust. So the 2020 election, unless you or I were expert researchers studying that election, we don't have direct access to the knowledge of whether the facts of it. It's a matter of who we trust, who does have access to the knowledge. Okay, so what media we read, what academics who quote, and what studies have shown from out of academia. What I'm saying is that policy relevant facts are based on social trust, because most of us don't have direct access. And that the problem we're running into now is that we don't trust the same experts. We don't always agree. We don't necessarily trust academics, right? Academics have been studying election problems for quite some time. But if I trust them and you don't, then we don't have shared information. Okay, we don't have shared facts. So the point of this is that the root of the problem is social trust. That's beneath the fact disagreement. So we have to restore social trust through I see you're shaking your head. Let me finish. Yeah. Okay, let me finish. Okay, you and I do not have to agree on the facts in order to connect with each other in a meaningful way. Because I can ask you where your sources are. You can ask me, or let me say what my sources are, and we can have a meaningful conversation. The problem with, and you're not necessarily saying this, but I hear this particularly on the blue side, is that how do we even have a conversation if we can't agree on the facts? Basically, they don't have the facts and I do. So how do we have a conversation? What I'm saying is we can relate to each other about where we find our facts and who we trust. There's a project, Brave Ranchers project came out of California called Walk a Mile in My News. Okay, so you can actually engage with somebody about our differences and where they come from and then building trust in order to proceed. So feel free to give me one more response to that.
Of course. I think what you're saying, and what I also believe, is you can certainly have a connection. I understand, because the purpose is to understand the other person. Okay. But when you get down to factual information, I don't think that there's a difference between where I get my factual information, where Joe Schmo gets his factual information. I think like anything, how do we know what's real? If you see evidence and you see it consistently among many, that's how we tend to agree on what's real. So I do disagree with you on that. I do think that it's not a matter of where we get our information. I think there are things that are real. And I'll go back to the Holocaust denier as an example. That
Sure.
happened. You can't say it didn't happen. It happened.
Sure.
So
I have to move on pretty quick.
okay, I know.
I'm not making a philosophical statement that there's no reality. I do
Okay.
believe in objective reality.
Okay.
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 Okay. And I believe that some issues are closed, that they're not debatable among reasonable people, like the Holocaust happening. It's not debatable among reasonable people. Flat Earth is not debatable.
Right.
But whether the 2020 election was stolen is widely discussed, widely debated, and that's why Braver Angels has processes where we can come together to figure out how to go forward. So I'm not making a broad statement that all reality is just made up, but at the level of how we decide together how to move forward, we have to not use a trump card. And you're not saying this, but this is what happens. How do I even talk to you because you're in error? And because that's how facts get used as a cudgel. So thank you for bringing it up. It's a huge important issue. And I'll say one more thing around the election. We have this trustworthy elections process that we've been doing for the last couple of years. And what we decided to do with there was to take 2020 off the table and to say, how do we want to move forward? What values do we want? How do we take the fears into account? This goes back to what I said about the fears. The genuine fears of Reds about elections being stolen, and the genuine concerns of Blues about lack of access. You start with those and you design something, you build trust, and you design something for the future. So that's how we've made headway in that one. So thank you, Paula.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Yeah.
All right. Our next question will be from Phil Gerson. And after that will be Margaret Sargent.
Okay. Well, Bill, thank you. I'm from Washington State, and Washington State, it's interesting because our state is a blue state, basically, and the national election. So we have a wonderful opportunity. We've launched the Bridging the Rural-Urban Divide here. And we had a session where we brought farmers to talk about their issues to city folk and so forth on September 24th. And right now what we're doing is we're setting up one-on-ones for people from rural and urban to talk about their, the thoughts about the election. But I think we have this wonderful opportunity because, basically, the election decided, Kamala, versus Trump, and Trump certainly won. But now I'm thinking, towards the end of February, getting together, because if Trump does all these things that he said, if he goes after 10 million immigrants, if he goes after people who disagreed with them, you can go on, firing X number of people from the federal government. I think it'll be chaotic. So it creates the opportunity now to go deeper and ask the conservatives, well, what do you think about the individual issues that, that the Trump administration, has brought about? So if Braver Angels could give suggestions on how we question, across the divide, that would be very helpful for our efforts.
Yeah, thank you. And Washington there's great stuff going there. So you may be familiar with the next initiative we're doing after trustworthy elections on immigration, and we're sponsoring trustworthy elections workshops all around the country, and we have a red leaning national organization and a blue leaning national immigration, both on immigration, co-sponsoring this. And so we're on that one, and the point will be to look for the common ground values, because if it only plays out this way, Phil, that Trump tries to move 50 million people out of the country, and blues simply criticize that without suggesting how do we solve the problem of our border, which is a mess, right? So what we're doing in Braver Angels is trying to create a platform where we're bringing Reds and Blues together to talk about what the future ought to be around immigration, so that we have immigration that enriches our country, and we have a sense that we have some control over the process. So I think we have opportunities there. It's not going to be our role to be the critique of what Trump says or what the opponents say, but to try to point to where we could end up. So thank you for your.
Yeah, just one quick comment. In our September session, we had the tree fruit farmer come up and talk about the fact that for apples and peaches and all that immigrants are important for their workforce. So when will that be starting? You know,
It's already begun. The piloting has begun, Phil. Yeah.
well, maybe Mary Beth can get some of that information to
Yeah,
me.
yeah, the pilots have begun. This is going to be a 2-year process. So our role as Brave Angels is not to dig into the particular controversies that are going to happen in January, February, but to set the stage for something bigger. And I'm very impressed with it. I'm very impressed with it. It started with a conservative organization approaching us and saying, for 30 years, they've learned how to block legislation on reform, and they're tired of that. And they want to find a way forward, but it's got to have the values and concerns of both Reds and Blues in it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Margaret Sargent, and then we'll have Mike Asbury after Margaret.
Okay, hello, Margaret. And if you unmute, we'll be ready to go. There we go.
Okay, hi. I agree with you wholeheartedly on the need to look at our own selves and how we view people who think differently from us, the individuals. And that I'm with you 100%. The part that I have trouble with is looking at a few of my fears, and I'll take one fear, which is a fear that democracy is ending.
Mhm,
And I look at that fear and I say, it's already happening.
mhm,
A couple of big newspapers declined to endorse, I think, because they were afraid. Couple of newscasters went down to Mar-a-Lago, again, because I think they were afraid. People in the news are getting letters from Trump's possible cabinet people saying, we're going to prosecute you. And it's already happening. That's not a fear. That's a reality that's happening. How far will it go? I don't know. And I do believe there will be heroes on both sides who want
mhm, mhm,
democracy to continue. But
mhm.
this isn't a pie in the, this isn't a, oh my God, this isn't a,
Sure.
crazy fear. This is a reality.
Well, this is a reality, a fear, a real fear.
Yeah.
We will
In other
see.
words, it's not just, okay, well, we may be invaded by China. This is
Sure.
oh my God, it's already happening.
Yeah, it's a realistic fear.
Yeah.
Right, right. And so let me just stay with you on that moment. With realistic fears, we need to engage with people with a view that there are risks, but have different assessments of the risks. So
Mhm.
my own view is that we're in for a stress test of our democracy.
Yeah.
Okay. And what I look at is nearly 250 years of experience with democratic institutions that I don't believe are going to collapse in 4 years. And so
I
that
guess I don't share your optimism.
exactly.
I don't think that they necessarily will collapse, but I don't have the optimism to believe that they
Of
won't.
course. And we're two citizens with different views.
Yes.
What I'm saying is we need to engage one another, and that neither of us can completely predict the
Right.
future.
Right.
And we can have these conversations, and
Yeah.
hopefully we can have the conversations in a collaborative way where I'm not saying, yeah, you're a fearmonger, and you're
Right.
saying I'm pie in the sky. We need to be doing that, and then we need to be having the conversations as things emerge, as specifics emerge, um, because then we know what we're dealing with. So if I want to make it clear that when I talk about fears, I'm not just talking about 0.5% fear, China invading or something like that. These are real concerns but that people can differ on how to assess them, and we will figure out as we go what. So thank you for raising it, and we will see, and we have to stay in conversation both across the divide and within, so that we can proceed constructively in a stress test time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Mike Asbury. Please unmute yourself. And after Mike, it will be Carol O'Neill.
And we're coming down to probably just a few more then. Yeah.
Thank
Yes.
you, Bill. Thank
Hi,
you,
Mike.
Mary Beth, for doing this. You know, there are some days I wish I never read a history book. Because your point about humility in your predictions has become difficult for me because of reading history, because of studying civics. I'm neither a constitutional lawyer nor a professional historian, but I just want to confess that the hard part for me is the looking at historic parallels, a little bit like maybe perhaps Margaret was getting to, and how to discuss that at all, if at all, with someone that does not see this the same way I do.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
Yes, yes, absolutely. In part because what we have now with many folks who voted for Trump, they're actually feeling quite optimistic, right? And then if you're blue who strongly oppose Trump, you're feeling very worried, very concerned, if not worse, okay? And so the Braver Angels approach is to own, which you've done very nicely here, okay? You began by saying, I wish I didn't look at history, okay? You didn't come across sort of, arrogant and all of that.
I
And
want to, Bill, but I'm holding myself back.
no. It's you're trying to be your braver angel here, okay? And so you didn't. You're not inducing a lot of defensiveness. And so, but I'll engage you on the particulars of history, just as an example, just a little dialogue here, because when I referred a minute ago to our nearly 250-year history of, we've had to change and grow, but these institutions have been around for a long time. And when I look at history of other baby democracies that fell into dictatorship, they were almost stillborn democracies. They didn't have the powerful history and legacy, and so that's where I have some of my hope. Okay, not necessarily accurate prediction, but that's where I have some hope. So what we're just doing now is the kind of conversations citizens have to have that neither of us. So I'm more on the hope side, acknowledging the fears. You're more on the fear side. I'm sure you're not dismissing my hopes, but it's a stressful time, and I just want to applaud you for the Brave Angels way in which you brought this up. Okay.
Prayer and meditation.
There we go.
Blessed be the peacemakers, as you told me in Gettysburg.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Carol O'Neill and then Len Breslow.
And then those will be the last two then. Yes. Okay. Hi, Carol.
Hi. Thank you so much for this presentation. And I was fortunate to be a delegate last year to the convention in Gettysburg, attended a number of workshops. I am in a red-blue marriage, and we celebrated our 45th anniversary last month. We've been together even longer than that. And politics was never an issue until 2016, even though we were on different sides. So I appreciate all of your points and strategies for managing emotions and relationships that you've presented today. Do you have any other advice or coping mechanisms for spousal situations such as mine?
Well, are you familiar with our Loved Ones Divided by Politics video series?
Actually, yes.
So I would encourage you to watch those. There would be some good tips there. See if your spouse would be willing to watch some as well.
Mm-hmm.
And largely, it's for me with a marriage is prioritizing the relationship. And what I like to say to people is, don't let any politician or political party hurt your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't care about it. You do. You do. And that this too will pass. This too will pass. We're in a kind of a fever state now, I think, as a country, and it affects us all. And we have to find a way through and hold on to our loved ones during this time. The marriage is more important than the politics. That's what I can offer at the moment. And then watch the videos.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have one final question from Len Breslow. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi.
Hey, Len.
Hi, Bill. Well, I think recent events in South Korea give us hope. A 35-year-old democracy can stay going. But I was wondering if it might be useful if there was some kind of individual exercise where people explored why do they care, by themselves? Why do they care what their friend thinks about politics? What would be the implication if their friend came to agree with them, disagree with them? What would that say about them, about me, about our relationship? That maybe there could be an individual exercise that people do.
Mhm, mhm. I encourage you to come up with it, a little spiritual exercise for agitated folks these days. Yeah, so thank you for that. So we may, since this was brief, we may have time for one more.
All right. Tina Michael.
Almost, Tina, almost as soon as you, yeah, there we go.
There I
Look,
go.
okay.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for this. This is a godsend for me. I've changed. I guess, in the last, say, maybe 4 years or so, I voted red this time nationally. Now, as you mentioned, locally and state, a little bit different judges and such. However, I have many friends that are very progressive, blue friends, and I don't see them all the time. They may be more like Facebook friends, and they're writing me, "How are you doing since the election, Tina?" And I'm like, "I'm good." I'm not going, "Yay!" I don't wear a MAGA hat, as you can see, but I voted a different way than I have before. And I just wonder, you mentioned in like a group, say on Zoom, and I'm the only one maybe that kind of thinks. I guess you might have suggestions about how to kind of broach, uh, to say, well, I have a little different view or something, or you know what I'm saying? Because it's very odd that people are, and I want to have one-to-one conversations with those
Right.
friends, though. That's
Right. The one-to-one is the best way to go. We
Yeah.
actually have, you may be familiar with the Braver Angels one-to-one process we have where you can have 2 1-hour conversations with a protocol. Okay, where you take turns and you summarize what you each heard. So think about inviting some of you blue friends to have structured conversations with you. Okay.
That's perfect. I love that you have those resources. That's
Yeah.
really
So
helpful.
go one-to-ones. So it's a structure and it keeps you from sort of escalating. And then it's a good advertisement. And then we'll go back to Mary Jo for the workshop, the webinar I'm going to do on December 21st or something, on group settings.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it's a different animal. And my immediate thing would be anything that you'd really, if you were going to speak up, you'd have to plan how you were going to do it. Like choose your words very carefully and be prepared for some sort of what. And so we're going to work on those strategies, which we've never taught in Brave Angels before, of how do you manage yourself in a group where you're the distinct minority. And so I'm so glad you came online here and told us that you switched and voted red this time, because particularly blues who don't know anybody, who seems like a quite reasonable person because they watch rallies or whatever, need more contact with folks who have the reasons, and we need to explore those reasons for the change that they make. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
So back to you then, Mary Beth.
Yes. So a couple more things. You can start thinking here. We're going to invite you to place in the chat one takeaway from listening to this presentation today. So one takeaway. And then several people have asked, and yes, this session was recorded and it will be shared with you next week. It will be posted on our Braver Angels YouTube channel, and I will also send it to everyone who was registered for this workshop. You'll be sent a link in the next week. And then I want to make sure that you're aware of the workshop that Bill mentioned. It's going to be on Saturday, December 21st at the same start time, 11 a.m. Pacific or 2 p.m. Eastern time. And this is going to be something that we haven't specifically offered before. This is about skills for communicating in group conversations. So Bill's going to offer strategies and practical tips for situations where there's a group and there's people who may be agitated, or you're the political minority or flying solo. So you will learn how not to be a victim of negative group dynamics by politely not engaging, or when you feel you must say something, to speak without defensiveness and then desist unless you see an opening for constructive engagement. And you'll learn how to intervene when someone of the other political side is being subjected to ridicule or wrath by people who agree with you. So in other words, this will be how to be a braver angel for yourself and others in challenging group settings. So we don't have the registration link up yet for that, but you can watch for it. And I'll also put it in the email that is sent to you this week with the recording. So we've got just one more minute here. If you'd continue just putting your takeaways in the chat. And we're glad that you joined us. A heartfelt thank you to Bill Doherty. And we look forward to seeing all of you at future Braver Angels events.
Great to be with you all.